Dobro večer, ja sam Andi Mioč, dobrodošli u novo izdanje Preko granice. Nakon mirovnih pregovora Kijeva i Moskve u Istanbulu, Rusi su radi postizanja dogovora o prekidu vatre obećali smanjiti vojna dejstva. No, prema izvještajima s terena, naredna noć je donijela najžešće granatiranje od početka invazije. Večerašnje teme su obećanja agresorske sile i moguće taktičke varke, promjena ciljeva invazije, novi svjetski savezi na pomolu i osokoljenost drugih autoritarnih vođa svijeta. Prema tvrdnjama Rusa, ukrajinske vojne snage su rano jutros izvele helikopterski napad na skladište nafte u ruskom gradu Belgorodu. Do trenutka snimanja ove emisije Ukrajinci nisu preuzeli odgovornost za ovaj napad, a moment eksplozije zabilježen je na više snimaka koji se šire društvenim mrežama. Danas, kao i jučer, najavljeno je otvaranje humanitarnih koridora za evakuaciju civila iz Mariupolja, grada na jugu Ukrajine koji se našao pod najžešćim napadima ruske vojske. Gradske vlasti objavile su da je Mariupolj zatvoren za svakoga ko želi da uđe, dok je svaki pokušaj odlaska veoma opasan. Naveli su da su Rusi jučer blokirali isporuke humanitarne pomoći stanovnicima. Danas su nastavljeni pregovori o prekidu vatre ruske i ukrajinske delegacije, a mala doza optimizma pojavila se nakon pregovora sredinom sedmice u Istanbulu. Rusi su najavili dramatično smanjenje vojnih dejstava u blizini ukrajinske prijestolnice, dok su Ukrajinci iznijeli svoje konkretne prijedloge za sporazum kojim bi garantirali sigurnost Ukrajine. Među prijedlozima Kijeva je trajna vojna neutralnost zemlje te bilateralni razgovori sa Rusijom o statusu Krima i Sevastopolja koji bi trajali 15 godina. Zatražene su sigurnosne garancije nalik na one iz člana 5 povelje o NATO savezu, s tim što se kao mogući garanti, između ostalih, spominju SAD, Rusija, Kina, Velika Britanija i Turska. Ruska strana je navela da će ukrajinske prijedloge predočiti predsjedniku Vladimiru Putinu. Iz Ruskog ministarstva odbrane je objavljeno da su glavni zadaci prve faze specijalne vojne operacije ispunjeni i da će se sada fokusirati na, kako kažu, oslobađanje Donbasa. Istakli su i da će drastično smanjiti vojnu aktivnost u oblastima oko Kijeva i Černihiva. Ipak, prema informacijama s terena, upravo u te dvije oblasti, nakon objave iz Moskve, krenulo je najžešće granatiranje od početka invazije. Ukrajina i njene zapadne saveznice nazvali su rusku najavu varkom i pripremom za druge napade. Ukrajinski predsjednik Volodimir Zelenski je rekao da micanje ruskih trupa dalje od Kijeva i Černihiva nije povlačenje, već posljedica djelovanja ukrajinskih snaga. Generalni sekretar NATO-a Jens Stoltenberg poručio je da alijansa ne vjeruje ruskim najavama i da ima podatke da nije riječ o povlačenju ruskih snaga, već o pregrupisanju. Istakao je da NATO raspolaže obavještajnim podacima prema kojima se ruske trupe ne povlače, već obnavljaju zalihe i jačaju ofanzivu na Donbas. Posljednju rundu pregovora Kijeva i Moskve u nastavku analiziramo sa Kataržinom Zisk, profesoricom na Norveškom institutu za odbranu u Oslu. Dobro večer, Kataržina. Kako gledate na posljednje pregovore Ukrajinaca i Rusa o prekidu vatre održane u Istanbulu? Rusi su rekli da će dramatično umanjiti svoje ratne napore u blizini Kijeva i Černihiva.
Well, I would say that it is great if it will be true. I mean, we have to wait and see what actually was going to happen. It is certainly, so I think I see two options here. One, if Russians are saying what they are saying is true, I mean, it's a very positive sign. And it would also mean that Russia is doing very badly in Ukraine, that there is actually their forces are in a situation where Russia actually is seeking the compromise. However, Russia has engaged in deceptive behavior before, and we have to see the actual movement of troops, the actual stop to the fighting in order to believe that. I mean, there is a possibility that Russia might be seeking that, because one scenario is that Russia would be trying to actually move the forces in order to encircle the Ukrainian forces in Donbass in order to take control of that region. However, again, we will have to wait and see what happens.
Koliko dugo prema vašem mišljenju Moskva može nastaviti sa invazijom kada je riječ o zalihama, sposobnostima i moralu trupa, i kako se ovaj rat može okončati?
On all of these accounts, so logistics, the morale of the troops, the way the operations have been effectuated, it's been going very badly for Russia in general. I mean, the offensive seems to be rather stalled. There are some movement of troops in parts of the country, but in general, the offensive has stalled. And Russia still have some troops they can move to Ukraine. Russia has other assets such as electronic warfare. They can also move to in a higher degree in Ukraine. They have drones. They have long-range precision weapons, Kinzhal and others that have been actually used in a higher degree over the last days. Russia still have capacities to move into Ukraine. However, these capacities Russia also probably have to keep in order to make sure that they can respond to a potential escalation that could also involve US and NATO. So one possibility is that they have actually been keeping this kind of assets in order, especially, for instance, long-range precision weapons, in case there would be an escalation with NATO. I think Russia can keep this kind of position war for some time. Russia can maintain some presence of troops in the different parts of the country in order to put pressure and put pressure taking out over quite some time. One option is that this prolonged conflict will be actually the reality. I think the Ukrainian forces are also preparing for that option. Completing this war by some kind of agreement, as we are seeing, the efforts on the Russian and the Ukrainian sides is another option. But unfortunately, again, we do not see enough evidence to say that the diplomatic solution would actually happen anytime soon.
Koliko je ruska agresija na Ukrajinu promijenila sigurnosnu sliku svijeta i utjecala na moguće buduće sigurnosne aranžmane u Europi?
It has had an enormous impact. I mean, we've seen that across Europe. It's been an awakening for a number of countries. With Germany, I think it's probably one of the strongest sort of examples of how this war was a wake-up call. Wake-up call in the sense that I think the Western societies, perhaps in particular the old Europe, has forgotten how security is the very foundation of the life we are living. And so there has been an awakening in order to provide security and defense on the European continent to a much larger degree than before, and prepare for a potential threat to, direct threat to security of in particular of the NATO alliance. I think also Sweden and Finland have also been very much concerned about what Russia can do next. And, Russia is one example, but of course there are also other forces. China's presence on the international stage and a more increasing assertive behavior in parts of the world have also been associated with this sort of awakening to the fact that we actually have to provide security and defense in a higher degree than it's been the case until now. So we've seen Germany, I mentioned that example. Germany has been putting much more money into rebuilding its defense, but we see this across Europe. Poland has been increasing also defense spending, again, Finland and Sweden and Denmark and many other countries basically increasing their own defenses in order to prepare for any potential future problems with Russia or any other country.
Hvala vam za vaše viđenje i što ste govorili za Preko granice.
Thank you very much.
A o tome da li su kretanja ruskih trupa uistinu povlačenje ili taktička varka, te da li je novi fokus Moskve na istok Ukrajine priznanje nesposobnosti, razgovaramo i sa Tomasom Jermalavičiusom, šefom studija u Međunarodnom centru za odbranu i sigurnost u Talinu. Dobro večer, Tomas. Kako vi gledate na navodne ustupke ruske strane tokom pregovora o prekidu vatre, nakon kojih su objavili da će dramatično umanjiti vojna dejstva u Kijevskoj i Černihivskoj oblasti?
Well, there are two possible explanations to this. One is that it reflects a military reality created by the Ukrainian forces on the ground, which inflicted quite unsustainable losses on the advancing Russian forces. And in recognition of that reality and generally the failed campaign design, the Russians are trying now to regroup and redeploy the surviving combat-worthy units to the east of Ukraine, where they could perhaps achieve some of their aims of the campaign. The alternative explanation is that essentially this is a deception, and it is aimed at, first of all, sort of stimulating this whole debate in the West about the de-escalation. And this kind of a fake peace gesture would offer opportunity for some countries to reduce the support of Ukraine with the weapons, which has been a crucial ingredient of Ukrainian success in many regards. And therefore, there is also some evidence actually that the de-escalation is not actually happening on the ground. The shelling continues. Some of the forces are digging in and resisting fiercely to the Ukrainian counteroffensive. The shelling this night of Kiev and Chernihiv was perhaps one of the most intensive during this campaign. So there is also substance to this argument and some evidence to this argument that indeed it is a deception. It's perhaps a little bit of both, and we'll indeed see, and we are seeing some of the units being withdrawn, although Ukrainian General Staff says that there's just a simple rotation to replace the exhausted units with the fresh ones. But at the same time, there are also statements from Russia that they're focusing on a campaign now in Donbass, in the east and south of Ukraine as well. And that could also be the case that they're trying now to shift some of the focus and concentrate their efforts in the direction where they could achieve something.
Spomenuli ste Donbas i istok Ukrajine. Šta zapravo znači objava iz Moskve da će se fokusirati na tu regiju? Je li to na neki način priznanje da ne mogu zauzeti Kijev i druga područja?
Well, obviously, the grand goals that they had, in particular the regime change in Ukraine, is no longer within the reach of Russia due to successful defense efforts by Ukraine. At the same time, even most of the reasonable, rational analysts and experts already at the start speculated that the most reasonable course of action by Russia would be to enhance the controlled areas in the east, extend the controlled areas beyond what under those banners of the People's Republic of Luhansk and Donetsk, and build a land bridge, also create a land bridge from the occupied Crimea to Donbass. Now we see that they have some successes in the south, although Mariupol, which is under heavy shelling, and is essentially destroyed, is still resisting. The Ukrainian forces are still resisting there, but the chances of success perhaps there are greater. They might seek to envelope the most capable, most experienced units of the Ukrainian armed forces in the east, in the so-called joint forces operations area, about 3 divisions. And if that causes a collapse of Ukrainian forces in the area, this could deliver some tangible territorial gains and also psychological shock to Ukrainian authorities, perhaps creating a leverage to negotiate basically concessions, territorial concessions. We might end up with something of a similar outcome to the Soviet war against Finland in winter 1939. Where Finland essentially won the war, but lost the territories. And that could be the case in east of Ukraine.
Da li je odgovor Zapada bio dovoljno odlučan prema vašem mišljenju kada je riječ o ruskoj agresiji na Ukrajinu?
Well, let me start by saying that Western response to this aggression by Russia was one of the biggest strategic surprises inflicted on Putin's regime by the West. Putin certainly didn't expect such a degree of unity and support to Ukraine, that the West's resolve would be so strong and the response would be so wide-ranging. At the same time, now it's quite obvious that some of those responses have to be stepped up. The sanctions have quite some loopholes. We also don't see the embargo of oil and gas, which generates a steady stream of revenues to Putin's regime, keeping it afloat and allowing it to fund its military machine and military campaign in Ukraine. The weapons we're providing, we have to step up the efforts here. It's not only the anti-tank and short-range anti-aircraft weapons and material and munitions that we have to provide. We have to also look into possibility to provide a heavy armor, anti-air, long-range air defense systems to Ukrainian forces, artillery, long-range artillery, and so on. All these kind of capabilities, which allow not just the harass and attrite the invading forces, but also push them back substantially and reclaim the occupied territories. And the West is quite reluctant to do that for the fear of escalation, that this will lead to a wider war. But to the contrary, Putin's regime has shown and the proclivity to step back when facing stiff resistance and resolve, rather than escalate. And in this regard, also historically, we haven't seen transfers of major equipment like fighter jets and so on, and during the Cold War by any of the sides to any major escalations into a wider war. So we are basically self-deterring instead of doing what is necessary to turn the tables and enable Ukraine's military victory in this war.
Hvala vam što ste govorili za Preko granice.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
A dok traje rat u Ukrajini, sa Korejskog poluotoka je stigla vijest da je Sjeverna Koreja sredinom mjeseca testirala interkontinentalnu balističku raketu. Projektil je pao u japanske vode, a Tokio procjenjuje da je raketa preletjela 1100 km prije pada. Riječ je o tipu rakete koja može letjeti hiljadama kilometara i stići do sjevernokorejskog neprijatelja broj 1, Sjedinjenih Američkih Država. Washington je osudio to, kako su rekli, drsko kršenje rezolucija Vijeća sigurnosti UN-a. Pyongyang je za to vrijeme objavio promotivni video u kojem lider Kim Jong-un lično nadgleda lansiranje. O tome da li je rat u Ukrajini osokolio lidera Sjeverne Koreje i kakve posljedice ruska agresija može imati po druge dijelove svijeta, razgovaramo sa Yong-Jun Kimom, profesorom na Korea National Defense University i članom savjetodavnog odbora za nacionalnu sigurnost predsjednika Južne Koreje. Dobro večer, Yong-Jun. Kakve implikacije će rat u Ukrajini imati po druge regione u svijetu? Vidjeli smo da je Sjeverna Koreja izvršila test nove rakete.
Now is not just the world people, but the Korean people closely watching the Russian-Ukraine war, especially this very strong implication for the Korean pensioner security. As everybody knows now, North Korea conducted the intercontinental ballistic missile test yesterday, and Russian-US relation is strongly influenced on the North Korean action, because North Korean believe now is China and Russia will not join the US-led sanction, so North Korea has a free hand. So North Korea will continue this kind of the provocation for the world and for South Korea as well. And now it's a new Cold War front line is more like clear. So now it's the Russian-Ukraine war influence on not just on the European continent, but also widely influence on the Northeast Asia as well.
Šta je sljedeće prema vašem mišljenju za Rusiju na međunarodnoj sceni? Vidite li možda neke nove saveze u nastajanju kada uzmemo u obzir izolaciju Rusije od Zapada, možda neki novi savez sa Kinom?
Absolutely. Now, many people question about the Russia-China cooperation or the future of the possibly alliances. Yes, I believe now is the time for the another Cold War, Russia and China. Before Russia and Ukraine war, U.S. focusing on the China, as everybody remember, the Beijing Olympic, the U.S. and Western country boycott, and now is the it's a time for the U.S. having two front line in the European against Russia and in Pacific region against China. So reaction of the U.S. lead the Western alliance. Absolutely, Russia and China will increase their cooperation, especially in security and military alone. So before the Russian-Ukraine, already Russia and China has a climax for their relation as a trust building and also military alliance. And now is the speed up for two countries who have a region for why they have to go together. So now it's more clear that new Cold War between the China and Russia against the US and Western country.
Spomenuli ste dvije fronte. Šta je prema vašem mišljenju krajnji scenarij na evropskoj fronti u rusko-ukrajinskom ratu? Koji su mogući ishodi?
Yes, now is a peace negotiation going on and some news focusing about the positive news, at the same time negative news. But I expect the end of a scenario will be final the negotiation between the US and Ukraine and other side Russia. Russia really want their influence on the region, and the US want to have a peace and also kind of a front line between the two. So I think it's at the end of World War, a situation will be a kind of peace negotiation between the two. The problem will be the global influence from the Russian-Ukraine conflict, because if everybody thought about the possible Putin-Biden cooperation before Russian-Ukraine war against China, but now it's impossible for the U.S. who have Russia as a partner against China because of it happened. So now it's the U.S. has a two front line, and I think it's the end of war will be definitely negotiation by diplomatic means. But at the same time, another new Cold War we have to face.
Kako će po vama izgledati taj novi hladni rat koji spominjete? U posljednjem hladnom ratu smo vidjeli nekoliko nuklearnih kriza. Mnogi stručnjaci govore o mogućnosti nuklearnog rata, pa i trećeg svjetskog rata. Vidite li vi mogućnost za neke nuklearne tenzije u bliskoj budućnosti?
There is anyway open scenario for nuclear use already. Putin and the Russian people said about if any Russian was threatened by the U.S. by military means, that they are able to use nuclear. I don't think it's a high possibility for nuclear war, but anyway, as a new Cold War, we will have a similar experience during the new Cold War during the 20th century. Actually, no war more, but anyway, the more tension and high possibility to see anytime accidental nuclear war or accidental conflict, physical conflict between the two sides. So I think the China, Russia one side, and North Korea, Iran, the other country will be the sideline, and the US and NATO country and Japan, South Korea, a kind of people, a kind of country in the Pacific region will be the US side.
Hvala vam što ste govorili za Preko granice.
Thank you very much for having me.
To je sve o centralnoj temi, vrijeme je za neke drugačije vijesti. Američki astronaut rekorder i dva ruska kosmonauta vratili su se na Zemlju sa Međunarodne svemirske stanice polovinom sedmice. NASIN astronaut Mark Van de Hey postavio je novi rekord NASA za najduži boravak u svemiru, gdje je na Međunarodnoj svemirskoj stanici proveo 355 dana.
Touchdown. Touchdown confirmed at 6:28 a.m. Central Time, 7:28 a.m.
Есть сухая, который не могу понять.
And Pyotr Dubrov, outside of...
This is the second measurement? Yes, it is.
U švicarskoj Ženevi je nakon 2 godine pauze zbog pandemije počeo sajam satova Satovi i čuda, gdje je 38 najvećih brendova poput Rolexa, Patek Philippa, Cartiera i Tag Heuera predstavljaju svoje novine. Ta zemlja je inače dom za 57.000 radnika u svjetski poznatoj švicarskoj industriji satova. I za kraj, pažnju gledalaca vremenske prognoze jedne američke televizije u Montani ukrala je jedna sova. Radoznala ptica istraživala je objektiv kamere postavljene na banku u gradu Great Falls. To je sve za ovo izdanje Preko granice. Hvala vam za pažnju i vidimo se naredne sedmice.